Whether or not Manny Pacquiao chooses to have that farewell fight, I don't think it really matters. His career isn't going to end with that big bang. He's not going to get the Spence fight. There's not going to be that incredible last victory which could alter his historical standing. Now, I think that's pretty much set in stone now. It's just open for interpretation. And so I would like to give my 2 cents, the 2 cents that a lot of people might not like, as to where I believe the Pacman and his incredible career deserves to stand amongst the all-time elite. I've got to preface this, though, with a key point. It is a deep contention of mine that the vast majority of boxing fans, even the ones who identify as hardcore, they are not familiar with most fighters pre-1960, which is an obvious flaw when trying to construct an historical list. They may know a little bit about Sugar Ray Robinson. They may even know that Bob Fitzsimmons was boxing's first triple champion. But the point is they won't be familiar with a lot of these guys and what it was that made them great. So many of these names that typically litter a top 20 pound-for-pound list. It would also probably help to explain what my criteria is. Well, I put quality of opposition above everything else. So yeah, we're going to factor in longevity. We're also going to factor in how many weight classes were you successful at. But opposition is king. Who did you fight? When did you fight them? And did you beat them clearly? Okie dokie then. Cue the heart attacks. Here are 2 lists that illustrate as to why I find it difficult to put Manny Pacquiao in the top 20. And why I simply cannot allow him entry into the top 15. Let me break it down. I think this is a list most fans will agree with. Manny Pacquiao's 4 best opponents. Oscar De La Hoya? No. He was on his last legs. Miguel Cotto? Not a bad shout, but I've always seen him as a lesser operator than these 4. Well, I can't argue with what Manny Pacquiao did to Barrera first time round. For me, it's the jewel in his crown. His career best win, arguably his career best performance. He was just relentless. He absolutely epitomised his nickname that night. Second fight closer, went the distance, but ultimately he's 2-0 against Barrera, with that first fight being one of the most incredible wins of the 21st century. But now this is where things start to get just a little bit hazy, a little bit complicated. The rivalry between Erik Morales and Manny Pacquiao ended 2-1 in favour of the Pacman. But those numbers, I do not believe, are indicative of an absolute superiority. Erik Morales was not the same guy in that second fight. Still just 29, yes, but his actual ring age. He'd been beaten by Zahir Rahim. He'd come down in weight. You could see his movement was just not the same. You've got to give Manny Pacquiao credit for what undoubtedly was a pivotal win in his career. He was evolving. He was becoming more refined, working on that Manila Ice right hook and all that. But what was more evident to me in that rematch was the deterioration of Morales. Manny Pacquiao is undoubtedly a greater fighter than Erik Morales. His body of work is just too big. But is he better than Erik Morales? Prime for prime? Feather super feather? I'm not so sure. And that's a bit of a problem. Now, on the subject of ambiguity in a rivalry, Juan Manuel Marquez says hello in capital letters. So statistically, Manny Pacquiao is actually the leader here with 2-1-1. But we all know that Marquez won the war in that last fight, which was the only clear-cut one in terms of a definite outcome. Now, I don't subscribe to what the likes of Mayweather says. It's 4-0 to Marquez. You know, he is trying to just have an emotional dig there. But the only fight I could really give to Pacquiao was that second one on the strength of the third round knockdown. He wins by 1 point. It was otherwise 6 rounds apiece. Another razor close fight, open to interpretation. So you see those 2 wins that are on the remaining tally, a lot of people disagree, and that is a bit of an issue here. Now, the third fight, which was the least compelling when it comes to action, is in fact the most relevant when it comes to underlining my point. So come 2011, Manny Pacquiao is riding such a high. People are convinced that he is this whole new monster. He is surely gonna do away with Marquez this time. The older man is not going to be able to keep up. And we just get another razor close fight. All the same problems show up. He makes Pacquiao's distances incorrect. He counters him. And he just makes him look a lot more ordinary. Now, we could say it's just a styles thing, but I also just think Marquez was a superior technician to the vast majority of Pacquiao opponents. Yes, better than De La Hoya, better than Cotto, better than Margarito. He just had more class to him. He knew what to do. He had such an incredible shot selection. And so in 4 fights, Pacquiao never truly gets the better of this guy. And last time out, he gets blasted out. Now, opponent number 4 probably doesn't require too much guesswork. Floyd Money Mayweather. The guy we really wanted Pacquiao to face in 2009, in 2010, and it just didn't happen. For whatever reason, it didn't happen. They fight 5 years later and Pacquiao clearly loses. But I agree with Max Kellerman that it's not that incriminating on Manny's legacy. It's not that much of a dig because he was the smaller guy. It's a simple point. But if we look at my top 20 pound for pound, let me put your attention on some distinctions of greatness here. Number 12 and number 13, Tony Canzoneri and Barney Ross. They fought twice. Ross, like Mayweather, was a naturally bigger guy. Canzoneri almost beat him twice. Very close fights. Really showing his pound for pound worth. When Pacquiao fought Mayweather, I know after it happened, people said, watch it in slow motion. Watch it with the TV upside down. It wasn't a close fight. Maybe 4 rounds go to Pacquiao. And so, yes, it was a bigger man who beat him. Not too much damage. But if we compare him to the same standards of the creme de la creme in history, his performances weren't as good. Now, if you know your history here, you may have spotted something which you cite as hypocrisy. Number 15 is Willie Pep, the great featherweight, who of course had an incredible rivalry with Sandy Sadler over 4 fights, just like Manny Pacquiao did against Juan Manuel Marquez. Difference is Pep clearly lost 3 times. So what's going on there? Well, I would say that Pep only really legitimately lost the first time round. In fight 3, he was ahead, and then his shoulder dislocated. And fight 4 was such a foul-ridden mess with Pep retiring with eye damage that you could not say it was indicative of Sadler's pugilistic superiority. The second point is that in their second fight, Pep was clearly the better man. He exhibited that necessary mastery over his opponent. There will be some who have Pacquiao winning the rivalry 3-1. But even those who belong to that select group, even if you do have Pacquiao just nicking those first 3 fights, you cannot realistically tell me that he showed that necessary mastery over his opponent. Like Pep did against Sadler in 1949, where you say, even if it's only for one night, I am clearly the better man. But remember, I didn't say it was impossible that Manny Pacquiao makes this top 20. I just said it was difficult. I could have him somewhere around the likes of Archie Moore and Mickey Walker, guys who did ship losses in their prime, but were incredible campaigners at the world level. Something you can't overemphasize with the Pacman are his performances. He had some of the most incredible performances of any all-time great. And of course, that's a huge factor why loads of people try and say Mike Tyson is so great. He looks sensational. And isn't it ironic? It was Tyson himself who said that Pacquiao was more sensational than Floyd Mayweather. Against the likes of David Diaz, Ricky Hatton, and as I previously said, the first Barrera fight, Pacquiao burned so brightly during those performances. Now let's take things a bit further. Here are the same 20 fighters, reshuffled, with an emphasis on weight hopping, pitting yourself against bigger men, and still being successful. And a lot of people would actually say that is the purest sense of pound for pound. That is the king criteria. And under this criteria, Manny Pacquiao is suddenly up in that rarefied air with the likes of Sam Langford and Harry Greb. Guys who only fought at one weight, like the magnificent lightweight Ray Leonard, are suddenly a lot lower. And sure, if we wanted to nitpick, we could say Pacquiao wasn't the man in every one of those 8 weight classes. He was only lineal in 5. Sure, but he's still the only guy in history who's won a legitimate world title at flyweight and went up to beat up somebody the size of Antonio Margarito. It just hasn't been done in that weight range. So if you're using that as your main trump card, it has got a hell of a lot of power. And if we emphasise technicalities like the only ever guy to win world championships in 4 separate decades, we might start to think that actually Max Kellerman was underselling the Pacman. He's a lock for the top 3. He's a lock for number 1. But with that fever pitch of praise, even with this focus criteria of weight hopping, to put Pacquiao that high is to willingly ignore his shortcomings compared to the other guys. And so when we take a second glance at this list, something starts to become apparent. Manny Pacquiao is surrounded by guys who were more dominant in their prime and beat better fighters. Harry Greb is the only guy to have defeated Gene Tunney, who was a natural light heavyweight. Bob Fitzsimmons, a former middleweight, dethroned the lineal heavyweight champion in James J. Corbett. And Roberto Duran jumped up 2 weight classes to defeat Sugar Ray Leonard. As good as Manny Pacquiao's victory was over Barrera, which, as I said, I believe it's the jewel in his crown, it does pale a little bit in comparison to some of those historic victories. The examples I just gave, 1922, 1897, and 1980 respectively, take me back to my original point. You have got to be familiar with champions pre-1960 in order to do justice to them and to Manny Pacquiao, to try and accurately gauge where his historical standing really is in the last 100 years of Queensberry boxing. Now, am I saying I've got all the answers? No way. There are different criteria to use. They're not always favourable for certain fighters, depending on how their career went. Definitely at heart subjective, but that is why it's fun. What I would like to emphasise to close this out is that for those of you that are familiar with your pugilist specialists pre-1960, you will know that to even forward the idea that Manny Pacquiao possibly deserves a spot amongst the top 20 of all time, it's not really so much a criticism as it is a compliment. Nonetheless, I do love the type of debate that these kind of videos, historical perspectives, inspire. So whether you want to try and give one of your own, whether you want to pick a few points I spoke about and go a bit deeper, or whether you just want to tell me that I don't know about boxing, have at it.